Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our session on cloud financial management, how to foster a FinOps culture. My name is Lauren, and I'm the content manager for the Google Cloud community. Joining us today is Upasana, Google Cloud technical account manager, who will be taking us through the session content and answering your questions. Questions are encouraged, so please feel free to add those into the YouTube chat box, and we'll be sure to get to them either in the chat or at the end of the session. And for any questions that we don't get to live, we will be sure to answer them in a recap post in the Google Cloud community. So you can see that link to the community in the YouTube description. All right, with that, I'll hand it over to you and then we'll get started.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. And thanks everyone for joining us today for this live Q&A session. Very excited to speak to all of you. And so today we'll learn about common cloud financial management challenges and how to foster a FinOps culture of financial collaboration and accountability that drives business value. We have a very small agenda today. We'll be going over what is FinOps, why is it important, how does it work, some little bit details about some customer examples, and finally some resources that will be very helpful to you. We also have some pre-submitted questions that we'll be going over, and then we'll have an opportunity to do some live Q&A. So hello, I'm Upasana. I'm a technical account manager with Google Cloud, and in my role, I actively help customers adopt and navigate FinOps for their organizations as they embark on their cloud journey. So let's look at public cloud and how it has evolved. Prior to the pandemic, IaaS and PaaS public cloud usage grew 43% per year. And since COVID, it has only served to further accelerate digital transformation and enablement of a virtual workforce. It's now forecasted that by 2030, Fortune 500 will realize over 1 million of value drivers associated with cloud enablement. However, even as astounding as these figures are, there's still about 30 to 35% of our customers that are, saying that they are, a lot of their cloud spend is actually being wasted. And about 80% of the CIOs believe that they haven't attained the benefits of migrating to the cloud yet. So why is that perception? And that's one of the reasons why is because optimizing usage is the top cloud initiative for enterprises as per the Flexera 2022 State of the Cloud report for the 6th year in a row. And migrating to the cloud is second. While migrating to the cloud can save money in the long run as it helps organizations get out of capital investments in owning and managing data centers, cloud is also a big operating cost and companies want to optimize as much as they can. However, as you can see on the right, customers still struggle to automate policies that will help them achieve the desired outcomes faster. For example, as you can see, only 33% of the customers have automated policies to implement tags, and about 42% are actually doing right sizing via automation. So why does it matter and how can customers get better at this? So in order to understand that, let's take a look at why cloud costs can vary a lot. Now let's take a look at this live example on the right. This is an example of a GCP workload that has a total cost of ownership in about $500,000. This shows a comparison of 100 compute instances in Northern Virginia region of type E2 standard 16, with the assumption that the utilization is about at 50% of CPU and 87% of memory. And these instances are running at about 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Based on these data points, we have estimated that by right-sizing this workload, which means that by actually finding a better machine type because of the way the resources are being utilized, we can reduce the total cost of ownership to 35%. And by purchasing almost like a year of commitment, which is again pricing plus optimization that you can see the green bar here, we can reduce the cost further to 60%. And finally, shutting down the VMs after hours and on weekends, we can further again reduce the cost to almost 76%. So as you can see here, that even though the cloud outlay may look very high, it is possible to reduce your total cost of ownership greatly if you actually have the insight into your usage and you can implement the right policies to reduce your monthly outlay. So why are customers not able to do this right away? And that's actually a good question. So let's take a look at some of the common cloud financial challenges that customers run into when they actually move from on-premises to a cloud type of a setup. As you can see, there are a number of pain points here, but we'll look at each one a little bit in detail. Now let's take a look at budget cycle. On-premises companies set budget during annual planning cycle. However, due to dynamic nature of complex cloud migrations and consumption patterns, the annual cycle will be rendered ineffective once the customer moves to the cloud. For example, if a company laid out a project plan for a cloud migration, they have a business use case, they have a timing and a ramp-up plan, the actual migration, although may look quite different, as the application dependencies are uncovered and new strategies are devised around doing a lift and shift migration versus refactoring or replatforming. Each of these can take a very different path and can impact your overall planning and your budget. Due to these reasons, it's not uncommon for companies to adopt a more dynamic planning process. Now let's take a look at total cost of ownership. Now, total cost of ownership in a traditional IT company is very centrally owned, and business units allocate cost by revenue and headcount. This approach will not work when applied to cloud costs due to the variable nature of the cloud and its unique ability to provision resources on the fly, like compute, storage, networking, databases, you name them, each of which has a very specific associated consumption cost, and then, of course, there's the issue of shared costs. So in order to combat this, many companies are attempting to attribute costs to line of businesses via showback or chargeback mechanisms by mapping their cloud costs to business mappings using labels and tagging best practices. And we'll cover a little bit on that a little bit later in this presentation because it's a really important topic. Now let's take a look at spend controls. These are typically determined by CapEx budget and the purchase order process, which is set up by a procurement team in a typical on-premises environment. Now, when you move to the public cloud, the spend is largely an operating expenditure, unlike a capital expenditure on-premises. These controls hence have no ability to limit spend. They can involve provisioning tens of thousands of discrete billing resources, many of which can be implemented dynamically. Hence, a one-time purchase process is simply not suited to meeting these business needs. How about predictability? Now, in an on-premises environment, these costs are typically stable, and customers usually achieve almost 98% or more in forecasting accuracy. But forecasting cloud expenses is an entirely different matter. It's common for businesses to start with same trend-based approach and as they use in data center, but then quickly find forecasting variances which go beyond 25%. Trend-based forecasting for existing workloads plus driver-based forecasting for trend-based workloads can really make a lot of difference. And also always remember to engage your application teams in the forecasting process. Now let's take a look at resource investment. In a traditional data center, IT teams operate off of a long-term investment cycles with capacity procurement intended for use over a 5-year or a longer life cycle. Due to the extended life of these assets, equipments are often configured with significant overhead to account for growth and uncertainty. Using the same approach in cloud to size infrastructure, the same as on-prem, can actually result in over-provisioned capacity and waste upwards of 30% of the cloud spend. Now, this will actually help you understand why a lot of customers feel that their cloud spend is being wasted, is because a lot of the sizing is done looking at their on-prem provisioning, which is usually over-provisioned and for a good reason. Now, given the dynamic nature of cloud infrastructure, it's critical that companies size their resources based on their current sizing requirements and enable dynamic provisioning to support workload growth. In order to address these challenges, companies are establishing Cloud FinOps capabilities to not only establish effective cost visibility and control, but also to accelerate the realization of value from cloud investments. So now this leads us to what is FinOps? We have talked a lot about all of the challenges that the customers face when moving from on-prem to the cloud. Now let us look at what is FinOps and how FinOps can help us solve these challenges. FinOps doesn't have a canonical definition. This is by design. As a community, which is very much open source, we are still learning how to get better at managing and operating financials based on variable consumption model of the cloud. And hence, here's our definition. FinOps is an operational framework and a cultural shift that brings technology, finance, and business together to drive financial accountability and accelerate business value realization through cloud transformation. So now that we know about what is Cloud FinOps, let's take a look at why it matters. Why does FinOps matter? Because cloud is not just a cheaper version of on-prem. It's just not a cool way of doing things. Cloud brings a different mindset and different functionalities. It brings flexibility, autonomy, innovation, but also new responsibilities when it comes to financial accountability. So here, FinOps helps you answer the question, why does FinOps matter? Because it allows you to continue your growth and innovation within a controlled environment. And here, the key to control is having a FinOps practice. So we talked a lot about challenges. We talked about what is FinOps, why it matters. Now let's take a look at what does FinOps contain and comprise of. So as you can see here, FinOps journey consists of 3 iterative phases and 5 pillars that can be seen here as a flywheel, which represents its iterative nature. Inform, optimize, and operate. As you can see in the outer ring of the circle, the inform phase is the first phase in the FinOps journey, empowering organizations and teams with visibility, allocation, benchmarking, budgeting, and forecasting. Once organizations and teams are empowered with this visibility and all this information, they need to optimize their cloud footprint. Cloud providers offer multiple levers to optimize. For example, using reserved instances or committed use discounts instead of on-demand resources, or being able to right-size your resource provisioning. These are some of the ways to optimize. Once organizations start to continuously evaluate their business objectives and the metrics that they are tracking against those objectives and how they are trending, then they start getting into an operate phase. This measure helps business alignment based on speed, quality, and cost. Any organizational success is only possible if the organization builds a culture of FinOps, which includes a cloud cost center of excellence built around their business, financial, and operational stakeholders who also define the appropriate governance policies and models. So now that we have seen each of these phases of FinOps, which are again iterative, like I said, each phase doesn't end in itself. Organizations actually need to go through the cycle multiple times before they get into a certain level of maturity. We have broken down each of these phases into 5 pillars. Let's take a look at each of these pillars in a little bit more detail. Now, the first is the accountability and the enablement pillar. As the name justifies, the accountability and enablement pillar in FinOps is focused on providing visibility and transparency into cloud spending so that the teams can make informed decisions and take ownership of their cloud usage. The main goal here is to establish clear accountability for cloud spending across the organization, ensuring that everyone has a shared and clear understanding of their role in managing costs. Now, let's say you were actually starting off with FinOps. To kick things off, you can focus on identifying an executive sponsor and start to build a cloud governance committee in your organization. For example, one of our customer CME group established a cloud center of excellence that had managing director level resources in the committee who had the authority to approve 1 million plus in cloud spend. This committee will be responsible for reviewing and approving budgets for business cases and emerging technology, which is key to especially for digital natives who rely a lot on new technology adoption. It's also important to form a central FinOps team comprising of cross-functional resources who would be responsible for setting up controls. For example, setting up and approving committed use discount purchases or reserved instance purchases. Now, this is something that can be centrally set up and then spread out to all the teams. Or, for example, creating a central policy document and automating policies. Additionally, Having a service catalog will enable auto provisioning of cloud infrastructure and self-service. Now, what is one of the advantages of self-service? It will ensure consistency and less wastage. Now, as you can see, the enablement aspect of this pillar focuses on providing teams with the tools, resources, and the training that they need to effectively manage costs. This includes implementing cost optimization best practices, cloud financial training, understanding of financial terminology, etc. Moving on, let's take a look at the next pillar, which is measurement and realization. This pillar focuses on developing of key business value metrics, also known as KPIs, to measure success of cloud transformation. Oftentimes, we see customers start with a set of cost optimization metrics and eventually shift to unit economics or business value metrics, such as cost per transaction or cost per customer served. So where to begin with something like this? Foundational to any good process is accurate data and effective metrics, which can start with the right labeling and tagging architecture behind your company's use of cloud resources. Start with metrics that are easily available and measurable. For example, cost efficiency metrics such as commitment coverage, percentage of idle instances running, average CPU and memory utilization, spot instance coverage, etc. Important to iterate on these metrics and choose the ones that matter to business and can determine business value. Once you identify the KPIs, it's important to benchmark using industry standards. One key thing that I would like to point out here is unit economics that you see under the value pillar. Unit economics is a key concept in FinOps. It refers to the relationship between the cost of a cloud service and the value that it provides to the business. By understanding unit economics, FinOps team can make more informed decisions about how to allocate resources and optimize costs. There are a number of different unit economic metrics, but they actually differ by your business and your organization. For example, PayPal uses cost per transaction. This metric measures the cost of each transaction that is processed by the cloud service. Or for example, retail companies like Target use cost per digital order. This actually allows them to justify a lot of the cloud investment that you're making when they are able to associate the investment to the revenue that is being brought in by the unit economics. Now let's take a look at everyone's favorite cost optimization. Cloud cost optimization here, when you look at a FinOps pillar, is not just about cutting costs. It's about knowing where to spend your money to maximize the business value. It's an iterative and a continuous process that provides a consistent methodology to visualize and manage cloud consumption in the most effective manner. Success in cost optimization can result not only in significant reduction in cloud spend, but also in re-architecting for improved application performance to manage user demand within the same cost envelope. So what is actually cloud cost? When you visualize cloud cost, in simple terms, cloud cost is resources used multiplied by the rate. So when you actually optimize the resources or you optimize the rate, you invariably bring down your cloud cost. So cloud cost optimization strategies address these three factors. Cost visibility. Identify what you spend, how services are built, and more importantly, the ability to showcase why you spent a specific amount for a certain business outcome. Now, this is particularly important when teams are trying their best to reduce costs and they're not seeing the impact on their monthly bill. Having the cost visibility will help them understand why the reduction is not impacting in their bill is because maybe they are spending more than they're saving because of a good reason. There is a new product that's being launched, which requires more cloud services, or their traffic to their website has increased, so it's requiring more natural organic growth and consumption. So having the right visibility helps you justify the spend. Resource optimization. Focus on eliminating cloud waste, which is idle resources. Auto-scale when necessary, and right-size the compute and storage tier to only use what you need. Often, this function is decentralized since engineering has the most context on where and how to optimize the resource used. And finally, we look at rate optimization, which is using historical data to make pricing model adjustments. For example, buying the right level of reserved instances, or committed use discounts. Usually, this is a centrally owned function by the FinOps team, as they have the full visibility in most of the historical cloud usage, trends, and patterns for your organization. Now, let's look at the next pillar here, which is planning and forecasting. Proper planning and forecasting in the cloud requires organizations to better understand the cost drivers, allocate spend, and benchmark efficiency. Monthly budget reviews are usually typical in most organizations, but it's also important to engage your application teams in the budget decision. Ensure that there is a process to determine and fund a budget. When it comes to forecast metrics, some of the things to think about is track how many times there are budget overruns by a specific application or by a business area, and track forecast changes. How frequently is your forecast changing, as well as the accuracy of the forecast. Now, what you should observe is this should get better over a period of time as teams iterate. If it's not getting better, then it means that you need to figure out what is causing these issues. Set budgets annually, review them monthly, and then monitor forecast weekly, and identify variances, update your forecast, and then communicate the updates to all the teams. This is specifically important as you have a natural cadence on how to come up with a forecast that works for your teams. Now, forecasting can be a very complex topic, and that is why a lot of our customers these days are also using machine learning models to do trend-based forecasting, which can also be an option to look into. Finally, last but not the least, we have the tools and accelerators pillar. And there is a lot that can be said about this, but one key important takeaway that I want you to have from this slide is when you are a company and you're looking at tools, the most important decision you need to make is whether you should build your own or buy. Now, our recommendation is to use native tooling as much as possible and supplement wherever needed. Now, top 3 cloud native cost management tools are AWS Cost Explorer, MS Azure Cost Management and Billing, and Google Cloud Billing. Depending on your cloud provider, you might want to stick with most of your needs using the native cost management tool. However, if you have a combination of multiple clouds or you are using on-prem and the cloud environment, you may also want to look at third-party tools to enhance your views or have a single pane of glass. The top 3 third-party cost management tools today are Cloud Health by VMware, which provides detailed insights into cloud usage and spending across multiple clouds and accounts. Cloudability by Apptio offers features such as cost tracking, budget management, and customized reporting. And RightScale by Optima offers features such as cost analytics, optimization recommendations, and budget tracking. Whatever is your tool of choice, always need to make sure that you need to come up with the requirements first and then figure out which tool would be the best fit. Because you do not want, this is the most important decision to make, because once you go down a path, it'll take a significant effort and time to pull back and look into something else. Hope you have liked the presentation so far. I would like to wrap up our presentation today with reminding you of the different FinOps cultures that we have in place. We have covered a lot of this earlier in our presentation, like the variable nature of the cloud, business value-based decision-making, democratization of data, accountability. A key one that we haven't covered so far is blamelessness. Now, it's important in the world of FinOps to make decisions early and also expect that you have your fair share of mistakes. It's important to treat mistakes as blameless opportunities to learn and improve existing processes. Remember, FinOps is an iterative cycle, and teams only get better with making mistakes and learning from them. There's another key aspect that I want to call out here is agility. It's important to drive agile processes for budgeting and planning within IT by promoting iterative budget allocation, IT spending, and forecasting. And it's also important to be quick. Finally, the most important aspect of FinOps is collaboration. Partner with IT finance, application development, and infrastructure teams for cloud financial management. Finally, here are some resources that will be of great help as you get started in your journey. We have some published white papers here that talk about what is Cloud FinOps, the different principles, how do you do cost optimization, how do you do cost allocation. There are also some good links to Google Cloud blocks which talks about 5 key metrics to measure Cloud FinOps, and also best practices for optimizing your cloud costs. Finally, there are also some YouTube links and podcasts that you may find interesting. So hope these links work well for you. Also feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions. It's also good to be involved in the FinOps community as it is pretty open source, and a lot of cloud providers are also joining these communities. Google Cloud has been a very loyal and long-term member of this community, and recently Azure has also joined this community. So do get certified. There are some options to get certified when you get started. Practitioner is obviously the most popular one, and it's something that once you get it, it's going to be easier for you to engage and figure out your FinOps for your organization, or if you're talking to your customers. And then there's also the professional level certification, which is a notch higher, but definitely get started with protection. And so with this, I would like to hand it back to Lauren so she can take us through some of the questions that we may have received during our session.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you all for your questions. We did see a few asking about the information in the slides being shared today. So I do want to share that we will be posting a recap blog in the Google Cloud community. If you did register for this event, we'll be sharing that with you via email as well. So we'll include the recording, the written Q&A, and the links to all of the resources that were shared in today's session. And with that, a couple of quick links here as well. We have a couple of upcoming sessions. If you're interested in diving even deeper into cost optimization best practices, we have a session on BigQuery coming up on March 7th, and another one on optimizing GKE on March 14th. So you can check out all of our upcoming sessions at that third link there at the bottom. And we would love to hear your feedback too. If there are other topics, questions that you have, or feedback for future sessions, we'd love to hear from you with that feedback link on that second link right there. Okay, but without any further ado, we'll hop into your questions. So if you don't mind going to some of the questions that we received in the pre-submitted form for the registration form, we'll start with those. How to motivate cloud operations teams to implement cost optimization recommendations generated by cloud cost management tools.
And thank you so much. Before I get started, I would like to thank everyone who submitted their questions, and also we're looking forward to live Q&A today. So this is an interesting one. How do you motivate your cloud operations team? Now, there are a few things that you can do. When it comes to recommendations, it's important that the recommendations are actionable and also they're realistic. So when I say realistic, I mean is realistic in terms of how much effort it'll be required to implement. Now, for example, some recommendations like shutting down idle VMs can be very easy to act on, or even like some recommendations around reducing auto scaling, whereas recommendations around containerizing your application might require a lot of architectural changes. So it's important to understand where the recommendation is coming from, and whether it's actionable and how much is the effort involved. Besides that, again, it's also important to understand the benefits of implementing these recommendations. These could include saving money, for one, which is really important, improving performance, or reducing risk. Also, it's important to make sure that the operations team has the access to the right resources to implement the recommendations. And this includes both the technical and the financial resources. So they should have the power to make those decisions that will help them to make these recommendations. Also, training and support is important. The team needs to be able to understand the recommendations and how to implement them. So for example, in Google Cloud, we have a tool called Active Assist, which provides a lot of the recommendations for each of the projects, and the teams can actually go in, and from the project, they will be guided to the recommendation as well as how much money it would save them. So it's important for them to be able to understand and train on what are the different tools that are available where they could get good recommendations, which are very actionable. Also, setting a good example always helps. So if you're a manager or a leader, it's important to set a good example by implementing recommendations yourself. And this will show the team that you're serious about optimization and you are willing to put in the effort to make it happen. And finally, last but not the least, is rewarding. Rewarding the team for implementing the recommendations and making it a part of their, either you could make it a part of your OKR or the team's performance review, but always like one key way to motivate teams is always like to make sure that their efforts are recognized, for them to be able to talk about how they have been able to save their company a lot of money or they have optimized performance. So this is definitely going to be important to motivate them to act on these recommendations.
Love it. Makes sense. I think taking it a step back just for a moment, we do have a question around, how soon a customer can start to think about FinOps. Is there any historical data that you need before you start thinking about a solution?
Thank you for that question. That's a very relevant one, and a lot of customers have asked this. I would definitely say, as a FinOps foundation, our recommendation is that you get started as early as possible. Even at a point that you're planning your cloud migration, you can start thinking about FinOps, because it's always easier to implement FinOps when you're at a very early stage, you don't have a lot of resources in the cloud, and that can actually help you set up the right policies and set you up for success much early on. A lot of the customers that we work with are large and mature and already a good way into their cloud migration journey, at the point, for them to like set up a lot of the FinOps policies, automation, etc. It does take a lot of time, even if for them to come up with the right labeling and tagging strategy that would work for their organizations. It does take time to go over everything they already have and then go and re-architect or repurpose. Whereas like if you're starting out new, like this could be a very good place for you to try new things, fail, and then learn from it, as well as if you're already aware of your on-prem business architecture as you're re-architecting or you're doing lift and shift, you can figure out what strategies work best for you when it comes to cost visualization, or even like making optimizations on the fly as you move, so you don't have to optimize things later.
Makes sense. All right. So our next question is, what are the top 3 areas or specific product configurations that are the lowest hanging fruits to reduce spend?
Great question. So I would go out on a limb and say that for most of the cloud providers, the number one cost bucket is always compute. And when I say compute, it can be GCE in the GCP language or your EC2 in AWS. So it's basically all of the money that you spend on virtual machines, which is basically leased virtual machine. And as a lot of the cloud providers actually move to the cloud, initially they move most of their applications to VMs in the cloud and run them as is. So that actually is not the very optimized approach, because it does result in a lot of over provisioning of infrastructure, as we had seen earlier. So one of the ways is, once you start running your workload and you start seeing that what is your resource consumption, it's important to monitor that. Right size. When I say right size, choose a VM that specifically meets the need of your application and not a much larger VM. Reducing idle resources. So if you're not running resources on the weekends or off hours, especially in your lower environments, you could turn them off and set that up on a schedule. You can also purchase commitments and use something called like spot VMs, which every cloud provider offers at a much lower cost for workloads that don't require which we call something called stateless, where you can run long-running batch jobs and spot VMs with very, very low cost. And also look at containerization, because that will help with auto-scaling. The second area of expense is usually storage. So when it comes to cloud storage, the expenses can really add up when it comes to your S3 or GCS when it comes to GCP. So choosing the right location and the storage tier here is the key. Also make sure you're picking the right storage class and only storing the data that you need. And you should always remember to delete the data that you don't need. A lot of the customers that I've worked with continue to add data because a lot of the streaming data is being collected in their storage buckets, which they sort of call data lake. And they always forget to either archive or delete the data. Now, always remember that there is an archival class where you could store data that you cannot delete, but you only need to keep it for compliance reasons. And that's going to be super low cost. Finally, the third bucket I would say is networking. So making sure you choose the right networking tier for your needs. Also make sure you architect to reduce egress costs, specifically egress costs when it comes to interzone traffic, and then minimize the data that needs to be sent over your network. So these will be some ways to reduce your consumption in these specific three buckets.
Great. Okay. So our next question is there any single source where I could receive all the pricing updates of Google Cloud products?
Yes, there is a single source where you can receive all the pricing updates for GCP products. It's called the Google Cloud pricing page. And Lauren, it would be great if you could drop the link here. This page basically provides a comprehensive view of all the pricing for Google Cloud products and services. It's regularly updated to keep the latest pricing changes in place. Do check it out. There are also very product-specific pricing with links included there as well.
Perfect. And that link is dropped into the chat. All right. Our next one is, what are your tips on establishing buy-in from engineers who think they already do FinOps?
Okay. Well, this is an interesting one. Yes, when we actually, there's a lot of, I would say, talk about this when we go and talk to customers. One of the things they come up with is they do get a lot of pushback when they're talking about cost optimization from the engineering team. Because, let's all be honest, like a lot of the engineering team, they get a lot of satisfaction around, they feel creating value when we deploy new services to the cloud. And sometimes they also feel that they are doing everything they can to design the services, to design the applications that they have built in the most optimized way possible. However, it's important to also understand that no matter how optimized the application deployment is, FinOps is an iterative process, and it's not one and done. So once you actually deploy an application, that doesn't mean that the application can be optimized further. Optimizing something should be a habit. It should be a part of your process. And so when you get a pushback from when the engineering team is saying that they already do FinOps, I would start out by just, first trying to understand their perspective. Understand like what they are doing today, and if there are, if they have any concerns. Also understanding what is their understanding of FinOps, and does it match what you think? If there's a difference in perspective. Also, it's important to address their concerns. While you understand their perspective, you can also address their concerns head on. Like, what are the benefits of FinOps? How will it help them? How will it help the company? And you can follow it up by showing them some data. Now, data is a very powerful tool in convincing the engineering team specifically, when you can show them that the money that they're saving with FinOps can actually be utilized for them to get the next cool tool, or to get like another member on their team. I know one of our customers actually did that. They said that if you need an operations person on your team to manage your finances, find a way to pay for that person. And one way to pay for that person would be to find that money by saving money by optimizing their resources. So that's what they did. It's also important to celebrate their successes. So once the engineers see the benefits of FinOps, again, it's important, like we said earlier as well, it's important to highlight that. It's important to recognize that. And also, finally, not but the least, it's so important to make it easy for them. FinOps should be something that should be made easy, which is why we recommend having that central FinOps team that is responsible for creating all of the automation, while the engineering team is only following the guidelines that are being set up by the central team, which kind of like makes it easier for them to act on some of these actions versus trying to figure everything out themselves. So yeah, that would be my answer to this question. I hope that helped.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so our next question, which I believe is also added in from the live chat here, is what are your recommended best practices for cloud forecasting and best practices on how to forecast GCP shared services such as BigQuery?
Awesome. Okay, great. I would say that, so just to answer your first question, I know we covered the forecasting pillar before, where we talked about, how would you go about like setting up a cloud forecast. A lot of the customers moving from on-prem to cloud have experienced there's a lot of change. And the reason why is because a lot of the forecasting earlier was probably done by one central team, whereas when you move to the cloud, because the engineers have a lot of power to spin up resources, you will start deviating from a central number if you don't involve all of the application teams in the decision making. So there are two ways you can get your forecasting going. One is using a trend-based, what we call trend-based forecasting. Trend-based forecasting uses historic trends to forecast future spending, and it also takes into account seasonality. So for example, you're a travel customer and you expect, during spring break, there's going to be an uptick in travel. You can actually bake that into trend-based forecasting. Or let's say Black Friday, Cyber Monday, our retail customers expecting a lot of traffic to their website. They do bake that in from year on year based on historical data to get more accurate forecast of their consumption patterns during that time. But the problem with trend-based forecasting is it does not capture new events. It only looks at past and then tells you how to forecast. There's another approach called driver-based forecasting. This is more KPI driven, whereas you can forecast based on business results, like active accounts, number of bookings, or let's say, for example, number of ad impressions. So this kind of addresses newer events, because if you are launching a new product and you're trying to forecast how many people will go to your website, you can look at your ad and you can look at ad impressions and how many people are commenting on it, how many people, looking at social media, doing sentiment analysis. You can come up with a much accurate forecasting or number that might work. The only problem with driver-based forecasting is it won't work for workloads that are not there in the cloud. And then finally, there's a rolling forecast, which is basically allows companies to adjust their forecast based on any shifts or big events. Like, for example, COVID. COVID was a really, brought a very big change in how people used cloud. A lot of companies went from 0 to like 100% of their usage. And so, the rolling forecast actually allows you to adjust your forecast year on year. So now that we are coming out of COVID, a lot of the companies that saw a spike during COVID now have to adjust all of their forecasts. So these are three ways that you can approach it. When it comes to BigQuery, we have a lot of ways to estimate BigQuery usage. In fact, GCP has rolled out quite a few tools that would allow you to forecast how much usage you would have. So I would definitely recommend using the BigQuery slot estimator to estimate the right number of slots to purchase for your workload based on historical performance. There's also options to create dashboards from information schema to monitor slot utilization and BigQuery reservations. The information schema are basically metadata tables that capture a lot of the usage information from BigQuery and allow you to basically slice and dice that so that you can come up with the right forecast based on whatever you're using already. And then on top of it, you can also create like canned reports. We do have a lot of canned reports that we offer on our BigQuery public documentation, which allow you to navigate your daily slot utilization, hourly slot utilization. If you have reservations, it also shows you a view of how you're using your reservations so you can adjust them, and reservations can be adjusted on a monthly basis. So there's a lot over there that's being offered. I would definitely recommend looking at some of those tools that are available to you, and there's also links that Lauren can drop here. Besides that, I know that there was some question about shared costs. There is a way for you to label users that are running queries against BigQuery so that you can get a more granular view of labels, by labels, understanding, which users are, consuming the maximum amount of information from BigQuery, or who are actually running the maximum number of queries, which is leading to the maximum number of cost. A lot of our customers also have project level quotas to limit, business running too many queries because they've seen a huge spike in cost. So there are some of the strategies that you can use, but I would say, start off with what we already have available and then adjust that to your needs.
Makes sense. All right. Moving right along. Thank you for all of your questions in the chat. We will be sure to get to those. So thanks for your patience. So our next question is, there any internal prioritization to add general availability support for labels on more components, all billable SKUs, ideally, to enable better cost analysis? Any plans to enable easier access to slice and dice of costs within the GCP platform itself, similar to AWS Cost Explorer, to avoid building out of Looker Data Studio?
Thank you for the question. And, there is a link here that, Lauren can drop here as well, that actually has a link to our public website, our public documentation that has all of the GCP services that support labels today. It's a pretty extensive list, as we do support labels for most of our services, so do check that out. As far as, slicing and dicing of the billing information is concerned, we have quite a few cost management tools that are available. Again, we can link that here as well. You can go to our cost management section, and there you'll see a lot of tools like built-in reports, cost breakdown. We also have our cost table that are directly accessible to customers in their billing console, where you can see SKU level breakdown of costs on a daily basis, as well as on a monthly basis. When you finally get your invoice, you can actually go to the cost table and look at all of the SKUs that have been billed, and you can use that to basically reconcile with any of the numbers. Let's say you're doing showback or chargeback, you can do that as well. And then finally, we also have the BigQuery billing export. I know somebody mentioned here about avoiding building out Looker Data Studio. We do have like out-of-the-box Looker dashboard that integrates with Cloud Billing Export. So do check that out. Obviously, Looker comes at a cost, so you may want to set that up, and there is a guide to how to build that out. It's super easy. And for even the billing export, it's almost like a 3 to 4 step process. It's very easy to set up, and I would definitely recommend setting it up and checking out for yourself on how you would like to visualize your costs. What are the most important things, so that you can only visualize those things on the dashboard. Like I said, there are a lot of metrics that you can look at, but I would always advise, to look at the 5 to 10 most important metrics that, really enable you to make decisions, rather than looking at a bunch of data, because it may or may not give you the insight that you're looking for if you have too much information. So do recommend checking those out. And if you have any questions, obviously reach out back to us.
Perfect. Yep. And the information about the labels supported solutions are in the chat, as well as the link to our cost management tools. And regarding that, there is a follow-up question here around recommendations. So does recommendations work for all GCP services in terms of cost recommendations?
So I think we do have a similar question as well that I think was asked as a preset question. We do have recommendations primarily for compute, storage, as well as I know we support some other services as well. We do offer active assist recommendations on most projects. So there are some recommendations that appear at the billing count level. There are some recommendations, for example, something like CUDs, which are at the billing account level. You can see those recommendations across all the projects. When it comes to project-specific resources, you will see those recommendations within a specific project. So definitely you'll find recommendations around right-sizing your VMs. You'll also find recommendations around projects that are not being utilized. Obviously, we are trying to include recommendations for other GCP services as well, but so far, there are limited services that actually support it. What I can do is we can definitely send you, when we get back to you, a list of all the services that support recommendations. So that way you can take a deeper look at it.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, next question. I think we have just a couple more that were pre-submitted. So a common problem that I run into on GCP is that engineers or dev teams can create assets and then forget or seldom use them. Is there a way to generate a report to see which assets are not being used so we can avoid paying unnecessarily?
Yes, and actually this is a timely question because we just talked about recommendation, and this is one of the areas that's actually supported. So Active Assist is what we call it. It's also called Recommender. but you can see that appears in the top navigation bar when you actually enter your project, or on the left-hand side. But basically what you can see is it's basically like a collection of tools and resources in GCP that simplify the identification of unused or idle resources and save you money. So it's kind of like based on machine learning. It looks at your past usage and it tries to figure out like what should be the optimal size that you should go for. So for VMs that you want to ensure that they're actively being used, as well as have the right level of resource allocation as well. So there are a few ways you can do this. There's the idle VM recommender, which will highlight the VMs that haven't been used recently in the last 14 days or so for existing machines. So you can either shut them down or to be restarted later, as shutting them down would actually stop the billing. And then you can also completely delete them from the project. There's also the VM machine type recommender, which basically helps you with right sizing. So let's say you're using a specific VM type, but you're not using most of the resources. The VM machine type monitors your usage over the last 8 or 10 days and tells you the right machine that would be a better fit for your workload. This again helps with right sizing, which can reduce a lot of cost. Finally, we also have other types of recommenders today that recommend, committed use discounts. If you don't have enough committed use discount coverage, they will look at your usage and they will tell you, hey, you can invest more and save X amount of dollars if you buy this committed use discount. You can also, there's also idle IP address recommender, which can help you identify the IP addresses that you may have provisioned but are not being utilized by your developers. And there's also idle persistent disk recommenders as well, which help you identify those persistent disks that may have been attached but are not being utilized. And that can also help in saving a significant amount of money. There's also newly that has been launched as an unattended project recommender. And this basically identifies unused projects that have been lying unused for the past 30 days. So it does have a longer window because it's a whole project, and deleting the project can basically delete all of the assets inside the project. You can also automate deletion if you feel confident in the recommendations. So few options to explore. We'll send you these links, but there are definitely ways to do this in a more automated way.
Awesome, thank you. And yep, just wrapping the general information about Active Assist there, and also the latest link there is to a list of those different recommenders. So perfect. Okay, our next question, moving right along, is during the 90-day 300 in credit trial, how can I see a breakdown of what I am using per day? I seem to be burning through the credits quite rapidly, but can't seem to find what's doing it. Seems that normally you would be able to see this information in the billing section of the Cloud Console, but during the free trial, it doesn't seem to be there as you're just using the free credits.
Right. So I would say that, yes, when you are actually using like the $300 trial period, by the way, I want to say thank you for signing up to use GCP, and we definitely value your use. So one thing I would like to suggest is go into the billing report. So when you're actually in the billing section, on the left nav, you can see billing, and then under that, there's a billing report. If you click on the billing report, you can see your usage grouped by project. And on the right-hand side, you can see something called promotions. And if you uncheck your promotions, you will be able to see like how much your actual cost is. So if you do want to see how much is your actual cost without the credits being applied, you can actually uncheck your promotions, and it'll actually show you on a day-by-day basis what is your expense. One thing I do want to say is our billing data does get updated like not real time. It's not like you use it now and immediately you see the data. It sometimes can take between 24 to 48 hours for the data to get updated. So do go back and check in. I'm sure you'll be able to see there'll be a graph that will show you your daily spend, and you can also uncheck the promotions to look at like what your actual spend is.
Makes sense. Okay, I think we just have a couple more. And then we'll get to all of those in the chat. So what are the best practices to limit data egress charges on files in cloud storage? Is it to enable requester pay on the bucket or limit availability to a particular region, considering both may have their disadvantages?
So yes, if you're making a GCS bucket public, or sharing it with a group of people, it's an easy way to make your data more available, obviously. However, if someone copies your data out of the GCS region that it's in, network egress charges will apply. And most of the time, these charges are actually passed on to the consumer of the data if the requester pays feature is enabled on the bucket. It does protect you as the data provider, but the charges are unintentionally being passed on to the end users who may not be unaware of that. So it's possible. So if you do not want to enable requester pays, it is possible to avoid network egress charges through the use of Google Cloud's VPC service controls, which basically establishes a service perimeter around your cloud project that contains your bucket, so you can prevent the data being copied outside the region, which means that if I'm a user outside the region and I'm trying to copy your data, then or get the data out of the bucket, access the data, then it's going to be denied, which means that that's basically to protect me from incurring those charges. If you do want people across regions to be able to access your data, then you may want to enable requester pays to protect yourself from those charges. And so I would say that definitely look at the requester pays feature, or use the VPC service control feature to create the service perimeter to prevent those egress charges. So those are your two options.
Perfect. And the links to those resources are now in the chat. All right. So I think our last one, how to track CapEx and OpEx expenses on projects.
So this is an interesting question, and because of the lack of detail behind the question, I would just assume that you're talking about CapEx and OpEx in the cloud, because you can have a lot of CapEx when you're on-prem as well. So what is CapEx? CapEx is a cost that the business incurs when they acquire assets that will basically provide benefit. And the reason you're acquiring assets because you assume that it will provide benefits over the period of the current year. CapEx is also referred to as PP&E, which stands for property, plant, and equipment. Now, if you look at cloud, you can basically acquire a lot of CapEx expenditure if you ask the cloud provider to provision specific hardware for you that you own. Now, there can be a lot of use cases for that. We call that sole tenants on GCP, where we provision dedicated hardware for customers because of compliance reasons. They don't want to have what we call a shared tenant environment, where instead of sharing their hardware with other customers, they are basically own the hardware and they only run their own applications on it. In that case, that entire hardware is owned by the customer and not by the cloud provider, and which is why it can be expensed. Rather, it can be categorized as CapEx. Another thing to also keep in mind is that when you are keeping track of your CapEx, let's say you bought a sole tenant or a bare metal server, which basically is assigned to you, you may want to make sure that you include in your profit and loss statement as as an asset that will be depreciating over a period of time. So it's not necessarily clocked in as an expense, but rather, it basically is deducted over the period of time. So for example, if you're purchasing a VM for like 3 years, the amount or the cost of the VM, even though you paid upfront, you can show it in your profit and loss statement as deducted over the lifetime of the asset, rather than just like for that year. In contrast, when it comes to OpEx, the OpEx expenses refer to money that the company might be spending in running their day-to-day, so which means cloud subscription, any SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS-based purchases. Again, these are recorded in your profit and loss statement as expenses, and most of the times, you want to make sure that I would say most of the expenses you get on the cloud as a part of your monthly bill will be your OpEx expenses, which you will pay monthly, and you will show in your monthly statement as an expense. Whereas for CapEx, it'll be separate and it will be deducted over the duration of the asset. Most of the time, customers don't want to spend on CapEx because you get locked in for a specific amount of time, and you basically have full ownership of the asset. Whereas with OpEx, you're just leasing. So I hope this helps answer your question. I know we are almost at time. Lauren, are there any other questions in the chat?
Yes, I think we have time just for perhaps one or two more, and then we'll close out for today. So one question, there are a couple of questions around hybrid and multi-cloud. So does FinOps support a multi-cloud or a hybrid model, as this is common for larger customers? And then on top of that, there's also additionally some questions around what tools are available for that, whether it's with hybrid or a multi-cloud scenario.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think when we were going through tools and accelerators, I did cover some of that. When it comes to multi-cloud, yes, FinOps does support multi-cloud. It supports all the major cloud providers that are out there, and it is possible to basically use some of the tooling that we have in the market to have like a more single pane of glass kind of view. So for when it comes to like Google Cloud, we do offer Looker as one of the tools that would be able to provide you with that multi-cloud view. You can integrate that with your billing export as well as with Amazon's CAR report, and even same with AWS. We have customers today that use multiple clouds, and they are able to use Looker to basically show their expense across multiple clouds. Whereas when it comes to third-party tools, there are obviously different tools like Cloud Health and then Aptio Cloudability. A lot of our customers use that as a popular option as well. When it comes to hybrid, if you're looking at on-premises and the cloud, that is also something that can be supported, although the strategy around that can be very different on how you want to manage expenses. A lot of the customers like to keep I would say keep their on-premises expenses separate from their cloud expenses because it kind of like makes it easier with reconciliation. But yes, you could use any of these tools to basically have like a single view across all of your expenses.
Makes sense. Awesome. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. I know we're a little bit over, so thank you if you're still with us today. Thank you so much, Upasana, for this amazing presentation. For those of you who have already left, just to let you know that we will be posting this recording and the key takeaways in the community, and we'd love to hear from you if you have feedback. So I'm just dropping the feedback link into the chat. So if you have any ideas for future sessions or want to learn more about something, please let us know through that form. All right, so before we close out, Upasana, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I'm very happy to have the opportunity to talk to all of you today. And please send us if you have any other questions. We'll definitely get back to you with any questions that we didn't get to today. And hoping like all of you do try to take a stab at FinOps and also explore the FinOps.org resources and certifications.
Awesome, amazing. Well, we'll all be in touch in the community. Until next time, thank you so much again. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day or wherever they are today.
Take care. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. Take care.